Our scripture reading today comes from the book of Judges in the 19th chapter of that book. We are concluding our series, our study of the book of Judges today, and we are reading from the book of Judges just one section of this final story. The book of Judges is a pretty hard book in general, has had a lot of challenging texts in it, and this is perhaps one of the most challenging in all of the Bible. It's as if the book of Judges was saving up its most horrific story for the last. So, little forewarning, this story contains a lot of violence. I'm going to read it starting in the 22nd verse of that chapter. While the men of the city were enjoying themselves, a perverse lot surrounded the house of the Levite and started pounding on the door. They said to the old man, "The master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house so that we may have intercourse with him." And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly, since this man is my guest. Do not do this vile thing. Here are my virgin daughters and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Ravish them and do whatever you want to them, but against this man do not do such a vile thing." But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and put her out to them. They wantonly raped her and abused her all through the night until the morning, and as the dawn began to break, they let her go. As morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. In the morning, her master got up, opened the doors of the house, and when he went out to go on his way, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. "Get up," he said to her, "we are going." But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man set out for his home. When he had entered his house, he took a knife, and grasping his concubine, he cut her into 12 pieces, limb from limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. Then he commanded the men whom he sent, saying, "Thus shall you say to all the Israelites, has such a thing ever happened since the day that the Israelites came up from the land of Egypt until this day? Consider it, take counsel, and speak out." This is the word of the Lord. The story in this last part of Judges begins with a Levite, a holy man, a priest, coming to a small town in a village in Benjamin, the land of the tribe of Benjamin. And while he's staying there, he is attacked at night by a group of the locals, by a group of the men from the tribe of Benjamin who come to the door, and they want to attack and rape him and all of the people in the house. And the people in the house, trying to put the men off, offer them instead all their daughters and the concubine to try to mollify them. And they push the concubine out the door and leave it to the men, who abuse her terribly until she dies from it. And then in the morning, when the Levite comes out and finds her dead, he takes her body and he cuts it up and he sends it to all the other tribes so that they can be informed of what happens. And he's outraged by this and he wants them to be informed. I stopped reading there because the story is very long, but what continues in the next section of the story is that the tribes receive this gruesome package, and they are, of course, infuriated by this. They decide that it's going to be, that this crime has to be punished, and the tribes all go to war against each other, particularly against the Benjaminites who committed this crime, and they attack and they fight, and they go to war against each other for a while until they have nearly killed off all of the Benjaminites. They've nearly left them to the point where there's none left, and the Benjaminites are in danger of fading out of existence. Almost completed an act of genocide, essentially. And so then to resolve this problem, because they don't want one of the 12 original tribes of the people of Israel to fade away into non-existence, they come up with yet another terrible, horrific solution to this problem, which is that they invite the Benjaminites to kidnap wives from another tribe nearby in the Shiloh, so that the men can make sure that they can get enough children so that the tribe will survive. And they sort of collude together to plot to go and kidnap a bunch of women so that they can have a bunch of children and save the tribe. And the whole book of Judges ends with this section, that in those days, it says, there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. And that's how the book of Judges ends. Now, if you'll remember from the last several weeks of me talking about this book, you'll remember that this was written hundreds of years after the events that it purports to portray, that it was not a historical text in the sense it wasn't just reporting what happened so much as it was reporting the story in a way that was designed to support the claim of the house of David that they should be king over all of Israel. They were trying to get an argument for why they should be king over all of Israel. So here they make their closing arguments. Here their argument is, without a king, it's just total anarchy and violence. Look how terrible it is without a king. Without a king, anyone does to whatever they want to anyone else, and they hurt each other, and they kill each other, and they violate each other, and they kidnap each other's daughters, and they almost commit genocide. They almost kill one tribe. This is how bad it is without a king. This is the final argument of the book of Judges. This is why the book of Judges is trying to suggest that the people of Israel need a king. They need the house of David in order to look after them. And so that's why the text is framed the way it is, and why it portrays the violence so brutally and so terribly, because it's trying to scare people into what could happen if you don't have a strong leader, if you don't have a strong ruler. Now, this violence is no question, it's awful, it's horrific, and it's not something that, like, anyone should countenance under any conditions. It's a terrible story, and there's almost no redeeming characters in the story. Every single person behaves horribly. Every single person behaves horribly to the other people that are in it. But this last line of the text, all the people did what was right in their own eyes, is really powerful and useful for thinking about what it means to live in community, what it means to live in society with other human beings. Because at root in this text, one of the questions that's being asked is, what is true freedom? What is freedom? What does it mean to be free? What does it mean to be in harmony in relationship with one's neighbors? There is a kind of childish understanding of freedom, a kind of simplistic understanding of freedom, what I would call a false freedom, that is the kind of freedom that usually little kids first figure out. It's the I get to do whatever I want. Like the kind of freedom you see, for example, like in the movie Home Alone, the first few hours that the kid is alone without parents, all he does is just eat all the candy and sugar and possibility and stay up and watch all the movies he's not allowed to watch and do all the things that he's usually forbidden from doing, right? The kind of freedom that we associate with like teenage rebellion, going out with your friends, having big parties, doing whatever you want, being reckless, being wild. That's a kind of idea of freedom that is that lurks in there in our subconscious, and it never really goes away, because that sort of childish, I get to do whatever I want, or you aren't the boss of me sort of freedom is still compelling even to adults, even though we maybe don't want to admit it to ourselves. There's an awful lot of people whose definition or understanding of freedom is basically, you don't get to tell me what I need to do. Whose definition of freedom is basically, I do what I want, it's my business, my life, leave me alone, you stay out of it. The problem with this sort of definition of freedom should be fairly obvious, right? Like it's not a very mature understanding of what it means to be in relationship with other human beings, and it leads to recklessness and self-destructive, and also destructive to other people, behavior. The reality is that we are not islands isolated alone who can do whatever we want without causing any consequences or harm to ourselves or others around us. What we do inherently impacts other people around us. An obvious example of this that's current in our lives right now is the situation of a pandemic, is the situation of the spread of disease. We have had a sort of long, ongoing, for the past couple of years, cultural argument happening in our society over how we should behave in the source of a pandemic. And there has been some people who have felt pretty strongly that actions taken for the collective good, for the benefit of all, things like masking or social distancing or using or taking a vaccine, actions like that are impositions upon their own personal liberty. And that personal liberty is founded in a sort of basis of, you can't tell me what to do. I do what I want with my own life. In fact, I think this kind of definition of freedom, this kind of individualized, you're not the boss of me kind of freedom, is pretty popular in American culture, generally speaking. Like, generally speaking, you see this kind of resistance to almost anything. I mean, I remember when I was really young, this kind of resistance even to things like seatbelt laws. That the idea that someone would make you to wear a seatbelt was just an intolerable imposition in your life, that you should be entitled or allowed to do whatever you wanted with your own health and safety, and that was something that no one should ever impose upon you. Same things with wearing helmets when riding a motorcycle. And similarly, we oppose often any kind of regulation that seems to be designed to limit certain actions or behaviors in a way to benefit, hopefully, the whole of society. We have the same arguments being made by business owners and corporations that we shouldn't regulate environmental things, that we shouldn't, regulate health things related to businesses like that. If individualist, you're not the boss of me sort of thinking about freedom had its way, we wouldn't be able to decide whether food was healthy or safe or not. We wouldn't be able to decide whether a restaurant was following health codes. We wouldn't be able to know whether a building was built according to, safety regulations that make the building safe for us to be in. We would have asbestos and lead in our paint and in our insulation and in our buildings. Lots of things which are harmful to us. If we follow this maxim of, you can't tell me what to do, you're not the boss of me, I get to do what I want, we wouldn't be able to have these kinds of rules in order to benefit the collective. So this kind of individualized freedom is destructive to the common good and to the common welfare. This kind of individualized freedom, all the people do what is right in their own eyes, is ultimately a pattern of behavior which leads to violence and horror stories in our culture. And this is not what the Bible means or understands by the concept of freedom. Indeed, in the New Testament, Paul defines freedom this way. He says that perfect freedom is found in perfect love, and perfect love is expressed through perfect service. Too many perfects in there for my taste, because I don't think anybody's really perfect at anything. But what Paul means by this is that a person who's really free, who's truly free, able to do anything, all the possibilities are open, who's truly free, would always and unerringly act in love toward their neighbor. That's what freedom would look like. It would look like love of neighbor. Paul seems to suggest that any action which is hurtful toward neighbor is not freedom. However free it may feel to be able to do whatever one wants, that it's actually a form of slavery, it's a form of bondage, it's a form of entrapment. And I think we can kind of see the logic that Paul is going for here if we extend the analogy of how our actions impact each other on other things. So for example, the more that we live into this individualized kind of freedom that we can do whatever we want when it comes to a pandemic, the longer the pandemic lasts. So the more that we behave as individuals able to do whatever we want in the context of a situation which affects all of us, the longer that situation endures for all of us. If we treat the same idea when it comes to other collective social ills, things like poverty and things like education and things like healthcare, we see the same implications. If we treat poverty as a merely an individualized problem, if we act as though people are wealthy or poor based on their choices alone and on their individual choices, every wealthy person earned it and every poor person earned their suffering, if we treat it as though that were the case, then we cause poverty to increase and to continue. The way to end poverty is to treat it as a collective issue. So long as we treat it as it's not my problem, we ensure that it continues to be a problem. When we act together for the common good, when we actually begin to have an opportunity to start to see some of these problems solved. And if you ask me, a society without poverty is a much more free society. Because what is poverty but a lack of freedom? A poor person can't choose where to be, how to live, what to have, whether to take care of their health, whether to have access to services, or to whether to have things. Poverty is literally slavery. It's a form of lack of freedom. Poverty is your options being narrowed down until you have very few options left. To increase freedom in our society would mean reducing poverty. To increase freedom would mean to reduce lack of education, would be to increase access to education. If we narrow down who has access to healthcare by deciding that healthcare is an individual option, it's up to individuals to solve and individuals to deal with rather than treating it as a collective issue, then we ensure that large numbers of people continue to go bankrupt due to healthcare bills. We ensure that large numbers of people don't get access to the kinds of basic preventative healthcare options and maintenance that would prevent them from suffering and dying. And there's no greater loss of freedom than death. There's no greater loss of freedom than death. So if we want to maximize freedom in our society, we need to maximize a collective will towards caring for each other's health. If we want to maximize freedom in our society, we need to maximize a collective effort toward defeating poverty. If we want to maximize freedom in the context of a pandemic, we need to maximize our efforts toward defeating the pandemic. Paradoxically, working together and seeing other people's problems as our own problems is a path to greater freedom for all of us. There's a lovely little illustration of this that's counterintuitive, but I think helps to give an example of how this works. They've been doing studies on traffic, on how traffic works and how traffic flows. And they do this both with foot traffic and with car traffic, and they notice a pattern. If every person in, I'll use the example of the foot traffic. Imagine a subway station, an underground subway station. Thousands of people coming in and out of the station, going to their trains and getting off their trains and trying to get to the places that they're going. There's these places which are bottlenecks, usually the escalators going up and down in and out of the subway station. And in these bottleneck places, if the norm rules that each person just goes however they want and gets there faster to try to get wherever they want to get, what ends up happening is you end up having these traffic jams where one person is trying to run up the escalator on one side and other people are trying to get out of the way and trying to step to the side to be out of their way to do that. You actually get fewer people through the station than if everyone agrees to just go alternating one by one on each side up the escalator. Now it feels to an individual like you're sacrificing your freedom to just run ahead and push past people and get wherever you want because you have to stand and wait your turn, and you have to wait your turn. But mathematically, more people get through the station faster if everyone just takes their turn. The same thing applies in automobile traffic. You know, if you're merging onto a freeway or something, or if there's a slowdown or a lane is merging up ahead, you'll always see someone try and get into the outside and zoom around, or you'll see people merging too early into the lane. Both strategies slow it down. The best strategy for getting everyone through is for everybody to zipper. Take your turns, one right after another, and you pull into the lane. If everyone takes their turns, everyone gets through this thing faster. If everyone is willing to take their turn in a situation, everyone benefits. But whenever one person decides that they'll be better off if they can zoom around the side, or they'll be better off if they can merge earlier, or they can cut through, it slows everybody down because everybody else has to adjust. Every driver behind them has to brake a little bit, has to slow down to do that, and it makes it worse for everybody. In other words, these illustrations help to get at what I'm trying to describe. If everybody works together to get through a situation and is willing to accept the little bit of limitation on their personal behavior in order to get through it, we all get through the situation better. But when individuals decide that their own need to get around the situation faster or do something different than everyone else around them is more important than what the group benefit is, it impacts everyone negatively around them. When all the people do what is right in their own eyes, the result ends up being suffering for everybody. But when all the people work together to do what is right for their neighbors, the result ends up being welfare for everyone. It's a difficult and counterintuitive lesson to absorb, and it's one that strikes as profoundly un-American in some ways. You know, we are a country built on individual aspiration and individual achievement, and we valorize that idea to the point where sacrificing your own desires and needs for the benefit of your neighbor seems, practically unpatriotic. But this is not a new problem. This is an ancient challenge in human cultures and societies. It's exactly what the book of Judges is wrestling with. How do we ensure what's best for everyone? And is it best for everyone just to do whatever it is they want for themselves? Or is there a better way? I hope, and I know, and I believe that our community is one of these communities that's trying to do this work, trying to learn how to live together well with each other, trying to learn how to put our neighbors' needs ahead of our own needs, not because we're selfless saints and heroes, but because we truly believe that as a community working and living together, we grow together and we thrive together, because we truly believe that liberty consists in loving our neighbors as ourselves, because we truly believe that loving our neighbors as ourselves is a path to wholeness and redemption for everyone. And I hope that you will join in that work, not just here in this community, but out abroad in the greater Sherwood area and in all of our communities around us, striving to persuade one another to work together for the world that could be. For the world where everyone has enough housing, enough food, enough medical care, enough education, enough space, enough time, enough joy, enough light to thrive and to live together. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor be unto them. Amen.